Start your day with a positive affirmation and intention. Since 1924, Daily Word Magazine has offered inspiration and practical teachings through daily prayer messages to help people of all faiths. Your subscription includes 2 months of daily affirmations, articles, and spiritual poetry to keep you inspired and motivated. Check out the digital subscription package that includes the online magazine with audio, smartphone app, and daily email. Get your subscription today. Visit dailyword.com or unity.org.
Experience the difference. Unity Online Radio. The voice of an awakening world.
Welcome to World Spirituality, exploring the unity within all cultures and faith traditions, with your host, Reverend Paul John Roach.
So hello and welcome to World Spirituality on the Unity Online Radio Network. Yes, I'm your host, Paul John Roach, coming to you from a relatively mild Fort Worth, Texas for July 6th. It's lovely out here. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world too. Today we begin a 2-part investigation into grieving, the grieving process, and I'm pleased to welcome the author of a wonderful book entitled Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Emily Thiroux offers a comprehensive guide to reclaiming and cultivating joy and carrying on in the face of loss. And as well as being a lecturer, an author, and a speaker, Emily has extensive personal experience in the grieving process due to the deaths of her 2 husbands, as well as father, mother, aunts, uncles, and many friends. And I think most of us can empathize with this and recognize it also in our own life experience, because loss is a factor that's common to every single person on this planet. She has created a unique program also called Writing Your Way Through Grief, to help others through the grieving process. And we'll talk about that because there's many mentions of journaling and creating through words in the book. So it's a pleasure to welcome Emily Threatt, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, to today's show. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's Threatt, not Threatt.
Threatt.
But I'll take it, whatever.
Yeah, I had a friend once, a musician, who pronounced it the way I said, but I never can tell, everybody's different. So, well, anyway, welcome to the show. We're so glad you're here. You believe also, as we said, in the healing power of writing and journaling, and much of your professional career has been, helping people write, and that influence goes through the book. Why is it so important, do you think, to write things down, whether it's in journaling or affirmation or letters to people, whatever? There's power in it, right?
I think there's great power, in writing. I find that if I just think about things, I feel like they just bounce around in my head. Sorry. And when I write, I'm sorry. Let me get a little drink of water here.
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
But when I just think about things, that I feel like they kind of bounce around in my head, and they just get stuck there. But when I write them down, I can really examine what I'm saying, examine what I'm thinking about, and it kind of makes them real somehow. And
yes.
Like if I write that I'm happy, then I feel happy, or I feel happier when I write that. And if I just think, oh, gee, I really would like to be happy, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And they say that, you don't really know something until you write it down, right?
That's right.
The very task of elucidating what you're thinking is a learning experience, and can be powerful as a result.
Oh, yes. That's a beautiful way to put it.
And also letters, in Unity, in our tradition, we often talk about writing letters that you may never send, but are important. It could be a letter to God or a letter to somebody that's died, or a letter to somebody maybe you have a hard time with, and you want to speak honestly with them in a way you couldn't do face to face. But a letter can be powerful, right? Some people actually mail the letters, but other people burn them. They've written them, they've understood the meaning, and now they release it through a burning ritual or whatever. But letters are powerful in that way.
Oh, letters are a great way to use writing. I have in my past, if I had something that I was having difficulty dealing with somebody about, whatever it was, if I wrote them a letter, generally I didn't send it, but by writing it, I figured it all out and figured out what I needed to do with the situation to make it better, make it whole. And when I work with people in my Writing Together Through Grief group, their favorite exercise is writing a letter to their loved one who died. They really like that. Most of them hadn't thought of doing that before, and they find so many things come out in the process of writing that either make them feel good or that they realize that it's something that they need to deal with. And then when they finish writing that letter, I always have them write a letter back to themselves from the person they wrote the letter to.
Oh, interesting.
And that's really powerful. I just did that a couple of weeks ago when it was my husband Ron's birthday. And there were so many things that are going on right now that I just wish that I could have a great conversation with him about what's happening in the world and in our country. And so I wrote all that in the letter. And then when I wrote the letter from him back to me, it showed me the significance of what I was thinking and what I'm sure he would have said. I think I knew him well enough that these things just come out, and it really helps me put things in perspective. And the people in my groups, when they do that, they just love it.
Yeah, I love that too. That's powerful. And, as we believe in unity, there is no time or space to spirit, so... And of course, you're from the religious science tradition, which is, very similar. We're always connected, right, to our loved one. The physical may be gone, but I don't think the soul and the spirit have gone. Of course, then they're still with us, and so we can literally commune in that sense. And this isn't sort of some woo-woo, psychic stuff. This is just the way the universe is built, right? That we are actually spiritual beings having a human experience and not the other way around.
That's exactly what I believe. And that's why this kind of writing where you're writing to somebody that isn't here physically with you right now, it's so powerful because one of the things that people deal with in grief that's the hardest is the absence of that physical presence. But by doing this writing, you can really feel like or know they're there and know what they'd say, and they can provide you comfort. And it feels good to do it.
I remember writing a number of poems after my first wife died, and finding that very powerful too, because it just let me express in a few words the things that you couldn't really express. I think poetry is good in that regard because it doesn't have to make quote sense. Prose, you have to follow a pattern, whereas poetry, you can say things that are sort of elusive and metaphorical, and you need that sometimes. I think when you're dealing with grief, it's not something you can rationalize, is it? It's a felt response that is deep within us, and you talk a lot about that in the book, that it's good to grieve. It's good to feel what you feel, and it doesn't always make sense, it to the rational mind, and that's not the point, right? It's there's a deeper process at work.
That's right. I know there's so much power in poetry, and a lot of times people don't think that they can write poetry, so they don't even try. So in my group, one of the things I do with that is teach them how to write haiku poetry, which is a very simple form of 3 lines. With the first line has 5 syllables, the second one has 7 syllables, and the third one has 5 syllables. And they go, "Oh, I can't do that." I said, "Just try, just write it and see what happens. And they're amazed at how they can come up with something. And doing this process of being given directions on how to do it, they're able to see that they actually can do it. And I've got one person that writes every morning when she gets up, she writes 3 or 4 haikus because it helps her keep things in perspective and dealing with her loss. And other people have started with haiku, and it's led them to write other kinds of poetry, short poems or long poems or kind of free verse where nothing needs to rhyme and nothing needs to necessarily make sense to anybody but who's writing it.
Right,
and
yes.
They really, really like to do that. And I find great joy in that when people tell me, oh, I can't write poetry, and then they find themselves doing it and they feel so good about what they're writing.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? Because somewhere along the line, somebody told us, oh, no, you're no good at that or whatever. And it's the same with painting and drawing, I think, because all kids paint and draw, all kids write poems. But, somewhere we were told, oh, well, that was just silly, whatever. But it's we have to relearn it, don't we? We have to recultivate those arts. And that's what this book is about as well, which I love about it. It's not just losing someone. It's losing, some of those gifts that we've had that, and now reestablishing them because, recultivating joy, for instance, is remembering the wonder of life, isn't it? That we had as children, that, we get ground down sometimes by various factors, and to recultivate, re-establish this awareness of joy is just miraculous, I think.
I think so too, and I agree with you about how as children coming up through school, frequently somebody will say, well, they'll give you a C on a drawing that you made or a D on something that you wrote, and you think, well, I can't do this, and that's what sticks in your mind. And so for the rest of your life, you don't remember who said it or who gave you that grade, but you think, well, I can't write or I can't draw. And I really encourage people when they're grieving, especially, to find some outlet for creativity. And an example with me was I always thought I couldn't draw. I just thought there was something about me that it didn't work. And we've got a beautiful arts center here on Maui that has all different kinds of classes, and they had a drawing class, and I thought, I'm going to go to that. So I went to it, and I loved it. I couldn't believe what I drew with the help of the instructor. She was a really good instructor, and since then I've taken several more drawing classes, and I absolutely love drawing. And I'm so surprised because I really believed that I couldn't draw. But when I draw, it's like a form of meditation that I'm so free of thoughts. I'm just immersed in the creativity, and it feels so good. It feels like a really deep meditation. So I highly encourage people to do something creative. Even if they think they don't have the talent to do it, they might be really surprised.
Absolutely. And, there are no limits here, right? And not in my philosophy, at least, except the limits we create for ourselves. So it's never too late to do those things you want to do, whatever it might be, because, it might not be drawing or writing, but something, something that's creative. Anything can be creative and healing, I think. If you like to fix cars, that's healing too, right? It's not limited to these things we call the arts or whatever. It's anything where we're using our focused energies, in a joyful way, and that can be pretty much anything.
Yes, that's true. And it can be things like snorkeling or going for a walk in nature or planting some vegetables or anything like that can make a real difference.
And that's what I love about the book. You've got 26 chapters in the book, which cover the whole range of subjects, and they're not necessarily sequential either, which is interesting. They sort of jump around a little bit, which is the nature of grief too. It's not sequential, is it? It's
Yeah.
they call it seasons of grief. There's different things come around, and then you think you're over that one, and then it comes around again or whatever. So it's a smorgasbord, if you like, of different approaches here. But I thought we might look at some of the chapters and see what comes up for us. But I sensed you had something to say about that first.
Well, yeah, for me, the reason it's written the way it is in the chapters like that is because you can just go to the table of contents and say, oh, well, I'm really dealing with something related to that issue right now, and here's a chapter on it. And I can read that, and then I can see how it can help me or what I can actively do to help me deal with my grief.
The most important thing, and you start the book with it, is the ability to be good to yourself, right? To wrap yourself in love, as you suggest. And, that's huge, isn't it? Because otherwise we're just beating up on ourselves. We're feeling loss. We're also feeling guilt, sort of survivor's guilt, whatever. We're maybe feeling regret, all kinds of emotions. And at that tender moment, when we're in the middle of transition, we just have to be gentle.
Yes, absolutely. And people tend to be really hard on themselves. Usually when somebody transitions, somebody who's close to you for a while, you're kind of in a fog, so to speak, that makes it kind of hard to do anything. And then when you start coming out of it, a lot of the times you just beat yourself up. You feel guilty and say, if only I'd done this, or if only we'd gone to the doctor sooner, or if only whatever. And that's not helpful. So it's really important to be able to see what it is that you can do that's going to make you feel better. Or you can see shared experiences, like you're not the only one feeling that way when you feel like you are.
Right. And that's why, often a support group can be helpful, right? I mean, I know a lot of people go to grief recovery workshops or ongoing classes, and, that can provide help. And they often encourage journaling in those as well. And it's not for everybody, I think, but, a lot of people can get something out of those groups.
They do. And what I discovered, because I tried to do that, and it wasn't working for me because I was finding so much sadness wherever I went. The online groups, the widows and different grief groups, because there's a ton of them online now, and the sadness, I'd start reading what other people were writing, and I would just really, the sadness could be overwhelming. And I thought, I've got to do things differently for me. I've got to look at things differently. And so what I've really been focusing on is how to be happy and grieve at the same time, because I just believe that's vital. And I'm in the process of creating a grief and happiness alliance where people will come together and be comfortable in their grief, knowing that the other people in the group are grieving something too, and that they don't have to feel guilty if they smile or laugh or be happy, because a lot of times people think that they need to be serious, or they're somehow disrespecting their loved one who's transitioned, and that's just not true. And it's important to see the truth that your loved one would want you to be happy. Your loved one wouldn't want you to sit around and be sad for the rest of your life. My mom did that. Mom and Dad were married for 53 years, and when Dad died, Mom didn't smile anymore. Only after she was diagnosed with a brain tumor did she start smiling, because I could see that she realized that, and how she was thinking was, oh, good, I finally get to be with my true love again, and she could start to smile. So I just think this opportunity to have this human experience, it's very important to enjoy it and to help others enjoy it too.
Yeah, and of course, there's some of the old Victorian values are still prevalent in our minds. I'm thinking about Queen Victoria, who lost Prince Albert, right, and then dressed in black for the next 50 years of her life, because she could never get over that grief, or Miss Havisham in the Dickens novel, who wandered around the house in a wedding gown because she was jilted, and but couldn't get beyond that. That's a terrible misfortune, I think, when we get stuck in that moment of time and can never be free from it. But I totally agree with you about, the guilt about laughing and having a good time, because some people just don't find that acceptable. But what I found going through my grief with my, late wife was that there were moments where I literally forget, that she was gone, and would be happy, and then I'd remember, and I felt terribly bad about it that I've forgotten. But that's a natural process. The mind can't hold on to it forever. And I think the forgetfulness for a moment, where you just go into another mode is absolutely essential, because otherwise you drive yourself crazy, crying all the time. I remember crying 3 times a day, for the first 6 months after she died. And, it's fine to do that, whatever you have to do. But eventually I said to myself, I've got to move on here. I can still grieve. I can still feel sad that she's gone, but I can't live a miserable existence. That wouldn't, like you said, that wouldn't be doing it would be doing a disservice to her to feel that bad. She wouldn't want me to do that.
Absolutely. That's just so true.
So you're a big advocate of prayer and meditation, yes? And
yes,
as a means to center ourselves and find the core of who we are, I guess, the peacefulness, even in the midst of trauma and difficulty.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important to establish some kind of practice that serves you the best. And a lot of times it'll evolve. You might start off with one thing, like you might just start off with meditation, because you don't have to think about what you're doing and, try to make it a certain way. You can just relax into the meditation so that you can find some peace. And then after you've been doing that for a while, you might want to add something to it. And so you could start journaling. I know I'm pray all the time. There's always somebody asking for prayer for something, and I just, it's just kind of an automatic thing to pray to support each other. But I start every day with a routine that I do that serves me, because that's what I've developed that works best for me. And when I start my day that way, I'm in such a good place. And if for something happens, like when I first get up and I don't get to do it right at that moment, I feel off until I get to do it. And what I do with that is I start always with gratitude. I write down at least 3 things that I'm grateful for, and specifically what they are, not just say, I'm grateful for the blue sky. Go further than that with each of the things that I write about gratitude. And then I write 3 affirmations for me. And again, I'm specific. I don't repeat the same thing over and over every day, but I start 3 different statements with I am and fill in the blank. And so I can, between the gratitude and the affirmations, I can realize that I really am fine. I'm living a good life. I'm fully loving unconditionally. And it doesn't have to be a romantic partner. It's my friends, even people that I don't necessarily know. And then the next thing I do is write down what my intention is. And that helps keep me focused. For instance, last week, I realized in writing my intentions that I've been really busy with promoting my book, and I had gotten my life kind of out of balance. And when I realized that, I thought, oh, wow, I need to pay attention to this. As much as I loved my book and loved to promote it, there's a whole lot more to life. I have to have balance in it. And when I realized that, I could act on it. And I'm not sure I would have realized it as soon as if I hadn't been writing about it. And then I finished that practice in the morning with writing down something that brought me joy the day before. And remembering that there always is something in your life that's going to make you happy. You might have had a bad day, but there was something that was beautiful or good or made you smile or whatever it is. It might just be talking to a friend or listening to some music that's your favorite music, or drawing a picture or writing something, whatever it is. Recognizing that joy with, you have your gratitude, your affirmations, your intentions, and your joy. What a great way to start the day. And after I do that, or sometimes before, I'll meditate. And that just gets me so centered so that I can just, when I'm finished, smile, take a deep breath, and go about my day very positively.
Sounds wonderful advice. Absolutely great. And the thing about gratitude is infectious. Once you start, you can't stop, right? And it's hard to get it going sometimes because that old curmudgeon gets in there and says, I don't want to do a gratitude list. I don't know. That sounds too, Pollyanna. But once you start it shifts your whole consciousness, doesn't it? Into the moment, basically. You're aware of all the things around you that are pretty amazing. At least I do. That happens for me. Is we're given God is profligate, if you like. The universe is abundance, isn't it? It's got so much that's around us at any given time. And you start counting that and being grateful for it, and you realize, gosh, there's more and more stuff to be thankful for. The simplest things too. It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? But it's wonderful to be in that consciousness because it does transform. I believe it does shift our being in a different direction.
I absolutely agree with you on that. I know when after Jacques died, the first husband that I had who died, I just was having a really hard time moving forward, just doing anything. I was just kind of stuck. And a couple of my friends.
I'm sorry I had to interrupt you. We have to take a break. I'm hearing the music there.
Okay.
I'm with Emily. We'll come back in a second on this wonderful show. Join us in a couple of minutes after these messages from Unity.
We're glad you found us. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
We now return to World Spirituality with Reverend Paul John Roach.
All right, welcome back to today's show. I'm with Emily Thiroux Threatt, and we're talking about her book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. And whatever kind of grief that might be, it can be the loss of a person that's very close to us, or it can be any other kind of loss, because this world is a world of impermanence, which could be a bad thing. But it's actually a good thing, because if everything stayed the same, things wouldn't work so well. So this is one of the conundrums of being alive, right? We're in this delicate place of being a human being, but we're really spirit. And how to remember that is crucially important. And really, this book is a remembrance of things divine, if you like, coming back to the essential joy at the heart of who we are, and carrying on in the face of that conundrum, in the face of the impermanence of this world. We talked a lot about various aspects of this already. You got a chapter on aspects of loss, and there's a whole list here: a yearning, shock, guilt, confusion, fear. You name it. There's all kinds of things that come that are associated with loss, right? And but the antidote, it seems to me, is always the same, and that is to find the center, which we talked about in terms of meditation and intention. But, when you're going through all those various emotions, they're all valid, right? I remember waking up thinking, that I wanted to talk with my wife, and then realizing she wasn't around to talk with, or waking up in the middle of the night and turning to her in bed, and expecting her to be there. It's a very confusing time.
It is, and especially for what the world has been experiencing with the pandemic. We're experiencing different kinds of loss than we ever thought we would have before. Just the loss of being able to be with your friends, being able to hug someone, being able to have a little party or social gathering. All these things we realize how wonderful those things are in our life, and that's a kind of loss. And then people lost jobs, they lost homes, they lost so many different things, and each one of those things are things that when you come right down to it, we're still here, we're still alive, we're still having this human experience, and life really is good even though loss happens. I right now can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been in my life, even though I've lost so many people that I was so close to. I still am enjoying the time that I have, and I feel really good about that, and other people can too. The key is people often think they're supposed to get over it, get over their loss or get over their grief, or aren't you done with that yet, people will say. And you don't get over grief. You can move forward with your life. You can have joy in your life, but you're always still going to love the people that you loved before they transition. You don't love them any less just because their physical body isn't here with you.
And absolutely, and that's a very good point, isn't it? There's no getting over these things. You use a lot. You quote a number of platitudes that people use because they haven't got the words to share. Like time heals all wounds, or I'm sorry for your loss. And when you said that, when I was a minister for 30 years in a church, and when I lost my wife, I think there were like 800 people at this, maybe more at the service, and every single one of them came up to me afterwards and said, maybe 700, maybe there were some that would use the different phrase, but at least 700 came up to me and said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And by the end of the 700th one, it's like I wanted to scream, because it's like I understood what they were saying and I was appreciative of it. But if I heard that phrase one more time, it doesn't help, does it? And,
no, I agree with you. I got to the point where I thought if one more person said that to me, I was going to say something rude back to them, and that's not me,
Right,
you just can't stand to hear it. It's kind of like have a nice day,
Yes.
It doesn't mean anything after a while, and they feel like it's kind of a social obligation because everybody else is doing it, and they want to say it so they can get on to the next thing, like, how about those Dodgers, and it allows them to feel better about having done something when it's not helpful to you at all.
Right.
So
exactly.
I always encourage people to say something like, they could say something like, "Oh, I loved how I always saw you holding hands, and that just always made me smile." Saying something like that is so much better. Or my husband Jacques was a fabulous singer, just beautiful voice, and I just loved it when people said his name and said how much they loved to hear him sing. That's so much more powerful than saying something generic like "I'm sorry for your loss."
It's we have to be compassionate though, because if people don't have the words,
that's right.
It's not their fault, is it? They just that's what we have to deal with. So and maybe
that's true.
Maybe we've done it ourselves, sometime in our lives. Instead of being sensitive, we've said a platitude, whatever. So just have to be generous.
That's right. And I realized that when I started getting so uptight about that I really needed to forgive them because they knew not what they were doing, but also forgive me for being upset about it. And once I could release those feelings, because they weren't the problem, it was me that was the problem. I was the one that was reacting when they were trying to be kind. So realizing that and forgiving myself for the attitude that I'd been having toward it was very helpful to me. But I also, in the process, realized that I need to think before I speak when I'm talking to somebody about their loss, and say something positive about them and mention the name of the person who's transitioned.
And like you said in the book too, sometimes silence is the best, especially if it's a listening silence, right? We don't always have to fill the silence up with our words. Just being present with someone, hugging them quietly, can be more powerful than any statement we might make. And or just holding somebody's hand or whatever, and they can feel your love. I mean, that can be very, very powerful, I think.
Oh, yes, and more of that in this world would just make the world a better place.
Yeah, amen to that. There's a powerful chapter. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's called Grief is Healthy, I think. But it's the I'd like to chapter, as I remember it. Where you, when you're honest about your grief, then you can take the next step into, okay, this is the new normal. And now I'd like to, and you have various things you invite us to write down. I'd like to eat better, for instance, or, because sometimes when we're in grief, we don't pay attention to what we're eating. It's sort of on automatic pilot. We're not always as healthy as we might be. I'd like to spend more time with people. I'd like to improve my exercise practice. I'd like to have a reason to smile. I'd like to be inspired. I'd like to discover the meaning of life. All the various I'd like to do something different. I love that phrase, though. I'd like to do these things, and therefore I'm going to set the intention to do them. Right? It's beginning to focus in a healthy direction. That's what I liked about the chapter, I think.
Yes, because it's real easy to be unhealthy by not making decisions or not paying attention. I know when Jacques died, I lost a ton of weight, and it wasn't that I was overweight and needed to lose weight. I just wasn't eating. I just wasn't focusing on it. I wasn't hungry. I didn't think about it. I wasn't having to fix meals, and so I just didn't. And I finally woke up when I was realizing how weak I was feeling and how I wasn't able to even go for a walk because I'd get worn out because I just wasn't giving my body the fuel it needed to survive. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me that it was important for me to take care of myself because I'm the only one who can.
Absolutely. And then extend it towards, larger goals, if you like, that are exciting, right? Setting one's intention to, I don't know, but, in my life, after my first wife died, it gave me a renewed opportunity to do things I hadn't done before. And some were for her because she was a writer and I collected some of her plays together, but also inspired me to put my poetry book together, for instance, and things like that. So there's times where, in her honor, in a way too, because I'm a big believer in that we can go forward courageously in an honoring of our loved one, right? That I loved her so much, and we had such a good connection that I want to remain connected, in various aspects of my life. And if I give in to grief or to the ultimate sadnesses of loss, then I'm not really honoring the highest and best there. So it's really an honoring when you move forward.
That's true. Absolutely.
In unity, and I'm sure in religious science, there's this phrase, you've got to let go of your story. You've got a story you've told about yourself. And when that's valid, isn't it? Because sometimes we have self-limiting stories. But on the other hand, storytelling is a powerful thing that's been done for thousands of years in different cultures. And to tell your story, to have a story, can elucidate a lot of things. A myth is a story, if you like, that shows profound truths. And And you suggest we tell our story, right, about our loved one or about our journey or whatever. And I think that's powerful, isn't it? We're not limited by that story, but it's something that we put together that makes sense to us, and hopefully can help others sometimes if we choose to share it, or definitely is helpful for ourselves. So that's what you're talking about, right? In creating the story.
That's true. I know with me, I found that the more I told my story about something, the shorter it got, until it got to the point where it had done its job. I didn't need to hold on and keep repeating that same story over again. And when Jacques had his first heart surgery, it was such a shock that it was going to happen. When anybody had asked me, I would tell them every detail about what happened during that process. And they would kind of smile and nod, but I got to the point where I realized they didn't really want to hear all those details. And I could make it shorter and shorter until finally I could say, well, he had 7 bypasses, and he survived, and he's healthier now than he has been, and I'm grateful. And so my story evolved. It was going as it was going along until it became the best it could be. And I realize now that with my husband Ron, when sometimes I would start on a story about something, and he'd look at me and he'd go, "Now, how does that serve you?" And I go, "You're right." And once I started paying attention to that, if I am telling a story that's not going to help somebody else and it's not going to help me, then I don't need to say it because it doesn't serve me.
There's an old Bruce Springsteen song that says, let's hope we don't become boring old people, talking about the glory days, and there's a tendency to do that sometimes, and it is boring to others because we don't want to hear the same old story. My grandfather, became quite ill at the one point in his life, but before he deteriorated, he was a storyteller, but the family had heard all the stories 12 times before. They were wonderfully told. They were fantastic stories, but it doesn't matter how great they are if you've heard them all before. But he just loved to tell those stories. But so we don't want to bore people stiff with it. We're talking about a healthy way of encapsulating something important for us, and like I said, the Bible really is a book of stories too, isn't it? It's a wonderful storybook of all kinds of human and spiritual psychology, and that's what makes it a wonderful thing, I think. Yeah. So another chapter is called Accepting Invitations. What do you mean by that?
Oh, that was a good one for me. After Jacques died, I had been sitting by myself. I would go to work. I was teaching writing at the university, and I would go do that, and I would come home and I would sit. I would read some. I would sit outside some, and I just wasn't doing anything. And New Year's Eve came, and I thought, I've got to make a New Year's resolution that is going to help me, that's going to work for me. And so I just prayed for inspiration for that. And what came to me was to accept invitations. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Nobody's inviting me to go anyplace. They were all, once you're not a couple anymore, you don't get invited to the same sort of things. And I thought, okay, there's a reason that this inspiration came to me, so I'm just going to go with it. And as soon as I committed to accepting invitations, they started flowing in. And I had some of the most wonderful experiences of my life by saying yes. And I'm so grateful I did that. The first thing that happened was I got invited to be on the editorial board for the newspaper. It was quite a large newspaper. And it was a one-year term, and it was fascinating. And I met so many people, and it was just great. And I had other things, like I got to be the nurse on a bicycle race across America. I got invited to go to South Africa with friends. I was invited to create a film festival. It was like every time I turned around, somebody was saying, "Can you do this?" And I say yes. And each event led to another bigger, more beautiful event, and I felt like I came alive again. I got up off my couch and I was living, and that was really important to me.
Yeah, I think there is a time, that's what I got after 6 months of grieving was, I need to move on in some way, not to forget, but to reaffirm life again and to say yes to things, and to the other relationships too, because again, it's a part of honoring the loved one. I think that you're willing to risk another relationship. Yeah. Some people say, "Oh no, you don't need to be in a relationship for a long time," and well, some people that works fine with, and other people rush in, and that's not good either. But I think when you feel the time is right, it's okay to reestablish, a love relationship if it feels right for you, right?
That's right. And with me, after Jacques died, we'd been married 22 years, and I just knew I wasn't going to get married again. I wasn't the least bit interested in a relationship again. And I was really surprised when I met Ron, and we were just so good together. But my challenge was I didn't feel unmarried to Jacques. I know that in traditional wedding ceremonies they say until death do you part, but it's not like I got divorced. I wasn't unmarried. And one day Ron said something about my ex-husband, and I said, "Oh, please don't say that." He's not an ex-husband. He was my husband who died, but there's nothing ex about that. And so it actually took me a while to be able to be open enough to say it's okay. I can allow myself to actually fall in love. I can allow myself to be able to get married again and lead my very best life. But I had to go through the process to get there. And I think that's something that people don't talk a lot about. So.
And thank you for mentioning it, because it's something that when I started dating my current wife, Wendy, she said you're still acting like a married man. You're not acting like a single man. And she was so right. I didn't even realize it myself at the time, but I was still, living as if I was in a couple, a couple's relationship, and not just me on my own, because I didn't want to deal with that. Actually, the idea of being single. No, I'm not single. I just had a wife who died, but that doesn't mean I'm single. Well, unfortunately, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, but it's an interesting psychological way of approach. You're still carrying that person with you in a sense.
Yeah, I know it's my name, Thiroux, Threatt. Thiroux was Jacques' last name, and Threatt was Ron's last name. And to me, I'm honoring them both. I love them both. I still love them both. And you can love more than one person at the same time. And a lot of people have a really hard time with that concept, that I know it's what's right for me. And they were both wonderful parts of my life. And I didn't give them up or, intentionally separate from them. That's just the way life happened. And it's okay to love both of them.
Well, when I date, whoops. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, sorry, I think somebody was trying to call. I was going to say, when I dated someone, after my wife passed, and before I met my current wife, and that person didn't want me to talk about my late wife at all. That was not allowed in the relationship. Whereas when I was with Wendy, she was totally open to the idea of me sharing, and she was incredibly patient and would listen to the stories, and it brought us closer, she said, because she understood my grief, and far from it being a problem, she felt like that was helpful for us, and I thought that was wonderful. That's it's just a different approach, but I very much appreciated the fact that she was able to integrate that into our relationship too.
It's vital. I think
Right.
you can't just cut out part of your life. You know, it's especially when it's from a death. If it's a divorce, it's kind of a different situation. But with a death, there's not the end of love,
Right.
and that has to be considered and honored.
I agree completely. Let me tell people about next week's show, and then we'll have a couple of minutes left to talk about something that you would like to, share that we haven't covered yet. Okay, to tell our
Okay.
listeners. But let me tell you about next week's show. Next week, social worker, lay Buddhist chaplain, and author Claire B. Willis joins me in the part 2 of our uh, investigation, if you like, of transition and grieving. And her book is called Open to Grief, Finding Your Way from Loss to Peace. And so that'll be at the focus of our discussion next week, which will be a lovely piggyback on this wonderful show today. And we'll see if there's some commonalities or some differences, whatever. So join me then for that. But we have a couple of minutes left. So what have we covered, Emily, that you would like to share with our audience today?
A couple things. I would love for your audience to be in touch with me, and they can do that through my website, lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com. And I would love for them to read my book. And I think one of the most important things that I cover in my book and in my life is the value of living in the moment. It changed my world when Ron and I, when he was going through all that he went through with his physical issues until he transitioned, we would stay in the moment, and it made things so much better. That everything was always all right in that moment, whatever moment it was. And when you can truly get to the point where that's the only place you're living, which is true, but where you recognize that's the only place you're living, your life can be so much sweeter, so much more peaceful, and so filled with love.
I love that. Yeah, and that's my little byline on all my emails: is be present to what is, because
Yes.
that's all we have, really, isn't it? And
Yes.
we spend a lot of our time elsewhere, which is all in memory or in projection into the future, which is fine, but it's not reality. The only reality we have is now, and so to be present to that is, and even when we're reminiscing, to be present to that is still being in the now, right? As long as we're aware,
Yeah.
right now I'm reminiscing, rather than getting lost in it. And it can be very effective that way, because we're saying, oh yeah, right now I'm projecting into the future, but I'm still here doing that. And it brings us back to that moment again. So it's not about, excising everything else and only being, right here, right now. It's about being aware of when you're not, and observing that, which you can only do in the now. So it's a wonderful exercise, I think, to bring us back home to this current moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and this book, folks, is published by Mango Publishing, but of course it's available in all the usual outlets, including Amazon. I think it's a thoroughly good read. It covers a whole lot of ground. I highly recommend that you get a hold of a copy and follow up with Emily as you're guided, because she's got some wonderful things to say, and because she's been a writer for so many years, she's written it in a very easily accessible way, a very down to earth, a lot of good examples. So yeah, altogether a wonderful read, and I'm so glad that you were able to be on the show today with us and share your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks everyone for listening. Join us next week. Stay safe and have a good time. Have some joy in your life. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Start your day with a positive affirmation and intention. Since 1924, Daily Word Magazine has offered inspiration and practical teachings through daily prayer messages to help people of all faiths. Your subscription includes 2 months of daily affirmations, articles, and spiritual poetry to keep you inspired and motivated. Check out the digital subscription package that includes the online magazine with audio, smartphone app, and daily email. Get your subscription today. Visit dailyword.com or unity.org.